This is East Asia Tonight.
Good evening, I'm Otelli Edwards. Tonight's top stories from East Asia. It's confirmed. Japan's parliament appoints Shigeru Ishiba as the country's prime minister after a runoff vote. What does this mean for the future of US-Japan relations? Now, China also signals willingness to work with Indonesia to implement joint consensus over the South China Sea, but division remains, with Beijing pressing sovereignty claims it says have been formed over the long course of history. COP29 opens in Azerbaijan with delegates bracing for 2 tough weeks of talks on climate finance. But China's push to add discussions on green trade barriers could delay the start of negotiations. And Hong Kong stocks leading declines in Asia after Beijing's latest measures to shore up the economy fell short of expectations. Traders also keeping tabs on the emerging Trump White House. Also in East Asia tonight, geopolitical tensions reshaping the global semiconductor supply chain. And Vietnam eyes an opportunity, banking on its good ties with both the US and China. Plus, Singles Day, or 11th of November, has become the world's shopping event of the year, with bargains and discounts luring millions of consumers to spend. But a slowing economy in its biggest market means changing sales tactics to get those shopping carts to check out. Japanese Prime Minister Shigeru Ishiba has secured enough support to stay on as premier, despite a major setback in the recent national election. Well, his re-election comes after lawmakers convened to vote in a special diet session today, the first since last month's snap polls. Well, Mr. Ishiba was named premier after 2 rounds of voting, and it marks the first time in 3 decades that the winner is decided in a runoff after no candidate won a majority in the first round of voting. Mr. Ishiba, who heads the Liberal Democratic Party, won 221 votes, while Yoshihiko Noda, leader of the main opposition party, the Constitutional Democratic Party of Japan, secured 160. With Ishiba set to form a minority government by today, it needs to lean on the small but influential opposition Democratic Party for the People, or DPP, to have enough votes to pass legislation. For more on this, we are joined now by CNA's Japan correspondent Michio Ishida in Tokyo, as well as Kotaro Tamuru, who is an adjunct professor at Lee Kuan Yew School of Public Policy, National University of Singapore. Now, he is also the former senator and parliamentary secretary under the Shinzo Abe administration. Well, thanks for joining us on East Asia tonight. I want to start with you first, Michio. If you could perhaps help us break down the election results for us. I believe some 18% are invalid votes. Just how significant is this, and how would this impact the political landscape going forward?
Well, first of all, the runoff was historic, the first in 30 years. The last runoff took place between Tomiichi Murayama and Toshiki Kaifu, and Mr. Murayama won to become prime minister. So it indicates how unusual this prime minister's election was. Mr. Ishiba won 221 votes, which was short of a majority, and Mr. Yoshihiko Noda 160. Now, 84 votes were invalid. If media reports here are correct, opposition parties other than the Constitutional Democratic Party basically submitted the name of their party leader. Now, Japan Communist Party leader Tomoko Tamura said, however, its members voted for Mr. Noda to reflect the public's opposition towards the ruling coalition. But if the 84 votes went to Mr. Noda, he could have been named prime minister. But the 84 did not, an indication opposition parties could not be unified. And this lack of unification was seen as a setback in the general election in October. If unified, analysts here say opposition parties could have won more seats. But for next July's upper house election, Mr. Noda said he is determined to work together with other parties to defeat the ruling coalition.
Professor Tamura, I just want to bring you in here. I mean, there has been a lot of talk about how Japanese officials, they're working hard to secure this meeting between Mr. Ishiba and Donald Trump. And you have worked with the Abe administration, and Shinzo Abe, he's been dubbed as the Trump whisperer. You know, he played golf with Trump, he ate burgers with him, and you know, he obviously, strategic flattery helps. So I'm wondering, what do you think U.S.-Japan relations would look like under Mr. Ishiba's leadership?
Unfortunately, in my opinion, the U.S.-Japan relations are quite unclear, not very stable. Prime Minister Abe, as you have mentioned, he has a great personal chemistry with Mr. Trump. Probably because of the character, but also, main point was he was a strong leader. Mr. Trump likes strong leader. Mr. Trump likes Prime Minister Abe because he was a strong leader, winning national election 6 times in a row. Winning the national election 6 times in a row never happened in Japanese politics, and he was in the prime minister for almost 10 years. So that's a significant difference from Mr. Ishiba. He's not, decisive and a very great foundation leader, and he's still the largest party in the Diet, but no more majority, simple majority with coalition Kome party. No majority yet. So Prime Minister Ishiba is not very much loved by Mr. Trump as a weak leader, I am sorry to say.
Yeah, I hear what you're saying, because Trump is known to like, other strong men, other strong leaders, and he likes dealing with individuals like that. So, Michio, aside from the potential meetup with Trump, what do you think are some of the key issues with the Prime Minister that he has to focus on in the coming weeks? And that's aside from trying to improve his golf game.
Well, we have to first look at his public approval rating. It continues to fall. According to Asahi News Network, it's dropped 4 points to 38.3% in a month. And it's based on a survey done over the weekend. Now, 87% do not feel the ruling coalition is cleared from its political fund scandal. So political reform is needed to win back public trust. In the spotlight also is on taxable income. The Democratic Party for the People, which is now the 3rd largest opposition party, quadrupled its seats in the lower house on its pitch for higher non-taxable wages. Both the LDP and CDP have tried to lure DPP to their side, showing their willingness to negotiate. The DPP appear more inclined to talk with the LDP to realize its pitch. But this morning, its leader, Yuichiro Tamaki, became the talk of the town. An entertainment magazine ran his extramarital affair. He admitted the report was true. Now, the repercussion of the scandal remains to be seen. Other issues expected to top Mr. Ishiba's agenda, the reconstruction of Noto Peninsula from the New Year's earthquake, and more recently, floods and landslides also hitting that area, setting up a disaster management agency, as he has launched a preparatory committee. But without a strong grip on power, he needs opposition party support. Now, may I ask Professor Tamura a question? The ruling coalition no longer holds a majority in the lower house. Opposition parties have been allocated 9 of the 20 lower house committee chairs, the posts there, crucial for deliberating and passing bills. Professor Tamura, how do you think this will impact policy making?
Yeah, Japanese Diet session in coming months will be very chaotic. So nobody knows the answer. Nobody knows the potential outcome. Nobody knows how far they can go to get compromised, because no one has a center of the gravity. So this is very bad for U.S.-Japan relations and also for Japanese economy. So business leaders cannot make a long-term investment because politics is so shaky, and it's going to be more shaky because, as you have mentioned, next summer we have a upper house election. Upper house in Japan is very powerful, so important election. So every party want to shine. Every party try to look good for the people. and everybody will talk about the benefit. Nobody talk about the burden. Japanese voters are normally prudent and very careful, but they are so frustrated with the high price and low wages that not catching up with the high price. So they might choose the, another dangerous choice and try to make Japanese, as a result, another shaky diet, even in the upper house. So that's damaging U.S.-Japan relations and also Japanese economy as a whole.
And Professor Tamura, you've added that, it's going to be a chaotic one, perhaps in the next Parliament session. Given the fact that, Mr. Ishiba, he is going to need the opposition support, whether it's to pass future bills or budgets, how likely, right, is it going to be, is there a political gridlock in a hung Parliament?
Well, so there's a rumor that there can be one option that, Prime Minister will kill himself in order to pass the important bills or in order to pass the budget. But, election is so nearby. The oppositions want to keep weak, indecisive leader in the position to win the incoming election. So there's no clear bargaining tip for both sides. So I think it's quite unclear, chaotic. It's not very good for Japanese economy, Japanese foreign relations. But nobody knows the answer. Nobody knows the potential outcome, or no one can advise to any party. I'm sorry to say.
No, appreciate your candid response there. Professor Tamura, I believe I heard from Michio that you hail from Tottori, which is the same as Mr. Ishiba. You've also rivaled against him for a lower house seat. You've also supported him to run for LDP president when you were a Diet member. Then there's also Noda of the CDP, whom I believe you also know quite well. So, rather than simply rivaling for a firmer, political grip, right, do you think that there is potential for them to work together towards a better Japan?
Well, probably that talk can be started after the upper house election. Until next upper house election, every party try to get more seat from LDP. So they don't easily cut a deal that might let them shine. So maybe after the upper house election next July, Japanese politics try to find a new balance, I think.
All right. Well, many thanks for your insights there, Kotaro Tamura, adjunct professor at Lee Kuan Yew School of Public Policy, National University of Singapore. And as always, thank you so very much, Michio Ishida in Tokyo. Well, in other news, Indonesia has denied claims that it recognized China's sovereignty in the disputed South China Sea and repeated its position that claims by Beijing in the region have no international legal basis. Well, this follows the recent signing of a maritime development deal between Beijing and Jakarta, which observers say risks legitimizing Beijing's claims over most of the disputed waterways. Now, China's foreign ministry today said that the two countries were willing to better cooperate on what was agreed upon in the pact. The spokesperson also stressed that China's territorial claims in the sea were formed in a long course of history and were in line with international law and practice. Just last week, President Prabowo Subianto, in his first foreign tour to China since coming into office, met with his Chinese counterpart Xi Jinping and reaffirmed the long-standing ties between the two nations. Topping their agenda was both countries' stance in the South China Sea, with Jakarta saying it had no overlapping jurisdiction with Beijing. China on Sunday demarcated baselines around a contested Scarborough Shoal. The move followed the signing of two laws by the Philippines that designated sea lanes and air routes in the area and allowed the detention of foreigners suspected of trespassing into their territorial zones. And for more, we are joined now by CNA's Olivia Seong in Beijing. Olivia, given the latest developments that we've just talked about, how should we read into what Beijing is signaling?
I'll tell you, overall, this would be Beijing continuing to double down on its position in what it views as provocation. Over here, we are seeing, however, another point of contention emerging, even as China and Indonesia have sought to build closer ties, especially on the economic front with Indonesian President Prabowo Subianto's visit to Beijing just a few days ago, and that being his first overseas trip since being inaugurated. And now the contention here is over a joint statement released by both sides that you mentioned there. The statement did say that the two countries reached, quote, important common understanding on joint development in areas of overlapping claims. And China's foreign ministry today saying that it was willing to work with Indonesia to implement the consensus of this statement on the South China Sea, adding that both sides will speak about the content and the mode of cooperation, adding that there is historical basis for China's claims, but perhaps an issue of interpretation, because Indonesia has denied that it has effectively recognized China's claims in the disputed waters, reiterating that it is a non-claimant state in the South China Sea. Also that China's claims have no international legal basis. Now, if you recall back in 2016, till now, China has not recognized the ruling of a landmark arbitration case, which ruled in favor of the Philippines, which said that China's claims in those waters have no historical basis. This also coming amid fresh tensions with the Philippines in these last few days, as we also have seen in the last few months, in fact, more skirmishes between China and the Philippines. China, angered by the latest Philippines move of enacting those two laws, aiming to clarify its maritime routes. In response, China, we saw yesterday, mapping out its baselines, or at least announcing the baselines of the disputed Scarborough Shoal in the waters. Beijing saying it strongly condemns the Philippines' moves, adding that it would respond. And what's also to note here is the tone that Beijing is taking, continuing to make clear that it will not accept what it views as challenges to its sovereignty. A Weibo account associated with state broadcaster CCTV saying that this move by Beijing clarified China's maritime rights and interests and was a, quote, slap in the face for the Philippines. Ateli.
Well, thanks for tracking those developments in the South China Sea. CNA's Olivia Siong in Beijing. Well, we're going to go for a short break now, but coming up next on East Asia tonight, more trouble ahead for tech firms in China. The U.S. reportedly ordering TSMC to halt shipments of advanced chips to Chinese customers. And why Vietnam thinks it's primed for success as U.S.-China tensions reshape the global semiconductor supply chain. Hello again. Good to have your company on East Asia tonight. It is now time for your business update. And Roland, how are the markets doing today?
Well, it's a mixed bag for the Greater China markets. Disappointment from a lack of direct stimulus from Beijing on Friday. Jitters over a Trump return, but turning into a buying opportunity for Chinese defense companies and small caps. The Shanghai Composite did gain 0.5%. The second bourse, Shenzhen Component, advancing 2%. Hong Kong's Hang Seng, though, led the losers in the region with property and tech stocks stacking up losses. The rest of East Asian markets also struggling to stay positive. Nikkei 225 staying above water, but gains were capped by dim prospects from its corporate earnings season. And heavyweight chipmakers were a drag on the Kospi in Seoul, now at a 2-month low, on worries about the U.S. halting TSMC chip shipments to China and having a knock-on effect on its local foundries. The Taiwan weighted index, 1% in the red. Chinese AI companies are set to face more supply challenges ahead. Reuters reports that the U.S. has ordered chipmaker Taiwan Semiconductor Manufacturing, or TSMC, to stop the shipments of its AI chips to Chinese customers. The reported restriction comes on the heels of TSMC notifying the U.S. Commerce Department last month that one of its chips had been found in a Huawei AI processor. Now, Huawei is on the U.S. restricted trade list, and suppliers are required to obtain licenses to ship any goods or technology to the company. The latest clampdown is expected to hit many more companies as it opens the door for the U.S. to assess whether other companies are diverting chips to Huawei for its AI processor. Analysts say, though, that while the move might lead to some short-term pain for Chinese AI firms, it could benefit the domestic chip-making sector as companies would have few alternatives. The CSI Semiconductor Index jumped more than 6% today. That's its highest since December of 2021. The CSI Integrated Circuits Index rose 5%. And shares of SMIC, that's China's biggest foundry and the country's main alternative to TSMC, rose more than 4%. Tensions between the US and China have led to shifts in the supply chain for the global semiconductor industry. And while many companies, or countries I should say, are vying for a piece of the pie, one could be pulling ahead, even though it is a relatively new player to the game. CNA's Tung Ngo has more.
This is the first batch of top 10 students selected by Korean electronic giant Samsung in Vietnam under a new semiconductor training partnership. They are being trained in a master's degree program, which will cover the entire supply chain, from designing microchips to producing semiconductors. And they will graduate in a year and work for Samsung's semiconductor plants in South Korea.
Thì những năm gần đây thì bán dẫn nó mới là một cái thuật ngữ mà được nhắc đến nhiều hơn. Thì là một người, tuy nhiên thì em cũng mới tham gia được cái chương trình này thôi, nên là khi mà mọi người biết nhiều đến như thế thì em thấy đấy cũng là một cơ hội cho chính mình và cũng là cơ hội cho cả Việt Nam.
These students form a part of Vietnam's frontline efforts to elevate the country's position in the semiconductor industry. Vietnam is currently behind some of its neighbors in Southeast Asia, such as Singapore, Malaysia, in developing its semiconductor industry. But it is drawing its fair share of attention from industry players. Prominent semiconductor chip designers and testing and packaging plants have started to come to Vietnam because of one of its biggest appeal, Vietnam's young population and potential talent pool.
Có một cái nhân lực dồi dào và rất là sẵn sàng cho cái hội nhập. Cái thứ hai là chúng ta có được một cái cơ hội, và cơ hội này rất là khó khăn vì là cái chuỗi công nghiệp bán dẫn trên toàn cầu nó có sự chuyển mình rất là mạnh, và đây là cơ hội mà tôi cho rằng là rất khó mà để lặp lại cho chúng ta.
And let's see a lot of uncertainty in how the return of Donald Trump to the White House will impact global trade and supply chains. And Vietnam's cordial relations with both Beijing and Washington makes it a relative safe bet for investors. Vietnam's government has seized on its competitive edge to introduce reforms and incentives to attract semiconductor giants.
Với chúng ta thì họ rất muốn là tất cả mọi cái phải rõ ràng, nhanh chóng, rõ, nhanh. Đấy, tức là muốn vào cái thì người ta phải làm được ngay. Chứ không phải là ví dụ ta lại bây giờ làm thủ tục mất mấy năm thì người ta đi mất. Thế người ta cũng không thể chờ chúng ta được, bởi vì nó thời gian là yếu tố cốt lõi hiện nay. Thành chúng ta cũng có độ khoảng 50 nhà đầu tư hàng đầu mà của thế giới trong lĩnh vực bán dẫn có mặt tại Việt Nam. Tôi nói ví dụ như Nvidia sắp tới cũng sẽ có mặt ở Việt Nam. Những cái tên tuổi hàng đầu như vậy cũng sẽ có mặt ở Việt Nam.
Vietnam has bold visions to develop a full-scale semiconductor ecosystem over the next 2.5 decades. It aims to train at least 4,000 engineers within 1 year for chip testing and packaging. Analysts are optimistic about Vietnam's potential.
Vietnam is rapidly emerging as a semiconductor powerhouse in the region. The growth is driven by strategic investment and a long-term vision from the Vietnamese government to build a comprehensive semiconductor ecosystem by 2050. From integrated circuit design, assembly, test, and packaging, Vietnam is well positioned to contribute at every stage of the semiconductor value chain.
Vietnam is off to a promising start as a manufacturing hub for semiconductors. But some investors say authorities will also need to address major bottlenecks that have plagued other industries in the country. These include administrative reforms and implementing innovative policies to ensure a sustainable supply of clean energy, something that is critical for the semiconductor industry. Tung Ngo, CNA, Hanoi.
And that'll do it for the business news. Oteli.
Thanks so very much, Roland. Well, on that note, we are going to zip out for a short break, but coming up next on East Asia Tonight, we will be breaking down issues that are likely to dominate COP29 discussions in Azerbaijan this week, and who will be gathered around the table to represent absent world leaders. Plus, a health epidemic is overwhelming flood-hit provinces of Pakistan as waterborne diseases plague vulnerable communities with no relief in sight. Now they're turning to COP29 for help. Hello again, you're watching East Asia Tonight. Japanese Prime Minister Shigeru Ishiba survives a vote in parliament, retaining his hold on the country's top post. Mr. Ishiba is expected to form a cabinet for his minority government today, 2 weeks after his party lost its parliamentary majority in a snap election. Indonesia clarifies a joint maritime development agreement it signed with China over the weekend does not mean it recognizes Beijing's sovereignty over disputed territory. And COP29 opens in Azerbaijan with delegates bracing for 2 tough weeks of talks on climate finance. But China's push to add discussions on green trade barriers could delay the start of negotiations. The United Nations climate talks open in Azerbaijan this week with an eye on the money. And you heard that right. Countries will have to try to agree on how to pay for the costly work of saving the planet. And CNA's Tan Chewy is here to tell us more. So, Chewy, of course, I have to ask you about the U.S. president-elect. Well, we know that Donald Trump has actually called global warming a scam, but we've also seen some pretty extreme weather events around the world.
That's right. 2024 is already on track to become the hottest year on record. And that's what leaders from the 197 countries at COP29 are up against. Let's look at East Asia. Who are China, Japan, and South Korea sending to Baku? And what are they bringing to the table? Even before the conference begins, there are fears of disruption. China has asked to add talks on green trade barriers that it says are hurting developing countries. Beijing proposed this together with Brazil, India, South Africa, countries who have all criticized the European Union's import taxes on high carbon goods. They say it's protectionist, punishes developing countries unfairly, and the climate conference has to talk about it. The EU is likely to oppose, and any dispute here over the agenda could delay the start of talks from day one. That's going to cut into the time left to strike deals. Vice Premier Ding Xuexiang is leading the Chinese delegation. From Japan, it's not clear yet who will be at the table in Azerbaijan. COP29 is opening on the same day that the country is deciding on a new prime minister. What we do know is Tokyo Governor Yuriko Koike is attending, and she has said she will talk about the Tokyo government's hydrogen and other renewable energy actions. South Korea is sending climate envoy Cho Hong-sik. The country wants to be carbon neutral by 2050, but it's still the second highest coal polluter among G20 countries after Australia. And data shows its adoption of renewable energy is slow. In August, South Korea's top court said its climate change law is not protecting the basic human rights of future generations. That's a landmark ruling after young climate activists, including babies, sued the government for not doing enough on climate change. The court gave the government until February 2026 to bring the law up to speed.
And for more, we are joined now by CNA's climate change correspondent, Jack Board. Jack, so I want to pick up on what Chewy said a little earlier about the potential disruption of the COP29 climate conference. What is the latest update from Baku on this?
Yeah, there's no doubt that these talks are looming to be some of the toughest climate negotiations that we've seen perhaps in the last decade. Just a few hours ago, the summit did officially launch. Azerbaijan is now officially the COP president. They are now in charge for the next year of driving the type of climate change negotiations that, of course, the planet needs to stave off disaster, to put it bluntly. let's talk about what's happening in the background that's going to make these talks so difficult. Right now, across the globe, take a look at the performance of many economies. They're struggling. We have unprecedented amounts of conflict and uncertainty and turbulence. And all of this makes it so difficult for nearly 200 countries to come together and find consensus. Everybody has to agree on the final text from COP29. Each of these COPs requires all countries putting aside a lot of the day-to-day geopolitical concerns, mistrust that have been formed, over the past year, and come together to work towards a unified goal. And at the same time, climate scientists are telling us that this is a period where action does need to be taken. We know that the levels of carbon and methane emissions in the atmosphere have never been higher. Fossil fuel use has not slowed down since the last COP in Dubai in the UAE. And global temperatures are also still rising. We're on track for 3.1 degrees of global temperature rise by the end of the century, based on the current commitments that exist today. We know that this is probably the hottest year on record. So all of that makes this COP a particularly difficult one. We heard, just a short time ago from the new COP president, Mukhtar Babayev. He's leading the Azerbaijan presidency. Take a bit of a listen to what he had to say at the opening of the summit.
Colleagues, we are on the road to ruin. But these are not the future problems. Climate change is already here. From flooded homes in Spain to forest fires in Australia, from rising oceans in the Pacific to barren plains in East Africa. Whether you see them or not, people are suffering in the shadows.
So they are going to have to come to a very difficult consensus, we heard you say, Jack. We're also hearing that this is called the money COP. What's the goal this year?
Yeah, absolutely. Everything is centered around money. It's centered around mobilizing huge amounts of finance, eye-watering amounts, really. And all of this is going to be centered around a new type of financial framework that the organizers and the UNFCCC are hoping to come to agreement on by the end of the 2 weeks. It's called the New Collective Quantified Agreement. So right now, under the Paris Agreement, developed countries have pledged to give $100 billion every year to developing nations' climate finance for them to, be able to mitigate and adapt a fast-warming planet. Mostly, that finance just hasn't been delivered. And so now the goal is to create something new, mobilize even more finance beyond that $100 billion. Organisers are talking about trillions of dollars that they're trying to mobilise, and that does seem like a tall order. But at the same time, it's not even enough for what developing countries need to survive. So that's going to be, a really tough sticking point, I think, to work out how to get public money and private money blended together and get it moving through some of these economies that are, in dire need of financing. Of course, we're also keeping a close eye on loss and damage. That does affect many nations in Southeast Asia. The Philippines will be leading the charge on getting that fund operationalized and getting more money into it. That's been a slow process since the fund was set up in Dubai last year.
Tall order, Jack. And there are also some big holes in the attendance list when it comes to world leaders this year. The Papua New Guinea Prime Minister has called it a complete waste of time. Why?
Yeah, James Marape, the leader of Papua New Guinea, put out a statement saying that he has serious concerns about this COP process and that industrialised nations are simply not taking the Paris Agreement seriously and not looking out for the needs of countries that are climate vulnerable, like PNG. As a result, he's not coming. He's not the only one who's not coming, but this was, a pretty outward-facing protest saying that, more needs to be done to focus on rainforests in particular, and as well as getting the rules around carbon trading, which has taken nearly 10 years now to get into a working order. These things just simply haven't happened, and he says that wealthier nations are not serious about fulfilling their obligations. Many leaders are not here. Only a handful of the G20 countries' national leaders will be present here in Azerbaijan. No representation at the top level from the United States, from China, from most of Asia. So that does kind of indicate that this COP is not being taken seriously from a national level. So having said that, this is a technical COP. It will be focused on a lot of the minutiae, a lot of the very technical agreements and clauses within the Paris Agreement. So it's being left to a ministerial level. And I would expect that national leaders have cast their eye already towards COP30 next year in Brazil. That will be 10 years since the Paris Agreement was signed. And we would expect more ambition from most of the world to be announced there. That's some of the headline-grabbing stuff that national leaders would, commit their time to.
Jack, I can't let you go without asking you a Trump question. I'm just wondering how his presidency is going to impact the climate policies, considering his previous withdrawal from the Paris Climate Accord and also potential implications for global cooperation on climate issues.
And President Trump really is the talk of the summit. He's not here and he won't even be the president for a couple more months. But no doubt his re-election has upended these climate change negotiations. I think it's put a throttle on the possibilities around the types of money that we're talking about, trillions of dollars that need to be mobilized. How can you get that done if you don't have the support or the involvement of the world's biggest economy? So no doubt that Donald Trump is looking to withdraw the United States once again from the Paris Agreement. He may also withdraw from various other climate-related organizations, the UNFCCC. It's also possible, and that will destabilize this UN process, and it will have a knock-on effect to other countries. So we'll be watching very closely every dollar, every decision, and how the US lack of global leadership here will impact that. Will other countries start to be less ambitious? Will they use the excuse that the US is not in the room? Why should we continue to contribute money? And I think China is a very interesting and close watch in this space. Whether Beijing pivots to being part of this conversation. Typically, China has classified itself as a developing country, so it doesn't contribute to the Loss and Damage Fund, doesn't contribute money to other developing nations. If they were to pivot to be considered a developed nation or become a donor country, that would totally change the conversation. But we're yet to see whether China will make that decision or the other side of the coin is that they also simply withdraw from this process, say, if Washington's not involved, why would we be involved?
Still lots of ifs and buts, but really appreciate your report, climate change correspondent Jack Board. Now, one of the most climate vulnerable countries in the world will push rich polluting countries to honor their climate finance pledges at COP29. Millions in Pakistan are struggling after devastating floods 2 years ago left a third of the country underwater. Hero Mustafa traveled to southern Sindh, one of the hardest hit regions.
This is the second time in a month that 3-year-old Fiza has contracted malaria. Her mother, Fatima, says the local hospital sent them home with some medicine. But she fears that for Fiza, it's too little, too late.
2 फोत हो गए मलेरिया में झटके हो रहे थे उन लोगों को इसको भी झटके की असर है तेज बुखार होती है ना फिर उसको झटका होती है
Fatima Bibi and her family of 5 children live in this one-room mud house. There is no toilet, no running water, and the nearest source of clean drinking water is a 30-minute walk away.
हमारे गांव में गंदगी भी बहुत है किचरे बहुत हैं इसी वजह से मच्छर हैं क्या करें बस गरीब हैं रहते हैं क्या करें कहां जाएंगे पहुंच इतना नहीं है जो शहर में बैठेंगे या बच्चों को देखभाल करेंगे.
Not just Fiza, countless children in the Sajawal district in Sindh are sick. We are told that every family in this village has at least one child who is suffering from skin disease, diarrhea, cholera, dysentery, or malaria. Much of it a consequence of the 2022 floods. According to the World Health Organization, Pakistan saw a huge spike in malaria cases after the devastation from 400,000 in 2021 to over 1.6 million in 2022. The biggest surge was reported in the worst-hit provinces of Sindh and Balochistan. 2 years on, in many parts of Sindh, floodwaters have not receded, nor were water supply and drainage systems repaired. Severe monsoon rains in August this year once again inundated these communities, flooding ponds, wells, rivers, and bunds. It forced this community to use the stagnant, contaminated water for cooking, bathing, and drinking, putting them at increased risk of recurring health problems.
वो वाटर जो वज़ीर-ए-आज़म पिए, जो सदर पिए, जो चीफ मिनिस्टर इस्तेमाल करे, जो हमारे ऊपर वाले सरमाएदार, वो आम बंदे को भी पीने का वो साफ़ पानी मुयस्सर हो। हाइजीनिक से हम ओवरकम कर सकते हैं 15% डिजीज़ पे। इस पे एक फ़र्द से लेकर गवर्नमेंट सारी अगर जो है ना इस पे काम करे तो बेहतर नताइज हो सकते हैं।
Compounding the crisis in waterborne diseases is a lack of toilets and basic sanitation, forcing villagers to defecate in the open. This not only threatens the safety of girls and women, but also exposes them to high risk of infection. UNICEF says 53,000 Pakistani children die annually from diarrhea due to poor water supply and sanitation.
डिफरेंट एनजीओज़ हर एक कैपेसिटी के अंदर जो भी उनको फंडेड प्रोजेक्ट मिलता है तो उसी के मद्देनज़र रखते हुए वो कोशिश करते हैं कि एट दी अर्लीस्ट जितना हो सके हम लोगों को रिलीफ दें। लेकिन यह है कि बहुत ज़्यादा मैसिव लेवल पे जब फ्लड आती है और ऐसा तरीका सैलाब आता है तो हम तो बस ये है कि कुछ टारगेटेड कम्युनिटीज़ को टारगेट कर सकते हैं, हालांकि नीड बहुत ज़्यादा होती है।
The SPACT hospital in southern Sindh reveals the extent of the health epidemic. Overwhelmed by the caseload and with a shortage of beds, only the most severe cases are admitted.
अभी हमारे पास कम से कम 300 से 400 मरीज एडमिट है यहाँ पर, जिसमें मोस्टली हमारे पास 150 से 200 हमारे पास मलेरिया की है।
Dr. Arshad Ali is on the front lines of this battle. He says a shortage of malaria medicine is impacting urgent care and worries that the hospital's inability to treat every case is endangering the future of an entire generation.
परमा कोई तो कभी कभार गवर्नमेंट की तरफ से मोस्ट गवर्नमेंट की तरफ से आती है क्योंकि प्राइवेट स्टोरों से इधर नहीं मिलती, उस ड्रग की कभी कभार शॉर्टेज हो जाती है। हाइजीन और सैनिटरी कंडीशन अच्छी नहीं होगी, मलेरिया फ्लड के बाद इतनी अच्छी नहीं है, पहले भी इतनी अच्छी नहीं थी, अभी और भी हमारे पास पॉपुलेशन भी पॉवर्टी वाली है।
Health officials warn of a looming public health emergency if the situation doesn't improve.
क्या कहते हैं, नई जनरेशन जो है वो वीक होती जाएगी, उस समय वो जो है न्यूट्रिशन होगी नहीं।
The Sindh provincial government is trying to address the problem by working with local NGOs and UNICEF to install hand pumps and toilets, but it admits more needs to be done and has accused the international community of ignoring Pakistan's plight.
The international world should think when they promise to then help those countries. Like Pakistan, we are third world country, we have to admit it. We don't have that capacity.
But observers say the government's patchwork approach to climate mitigation means that the most vulnerable often get overlooked.
I think political will, priorities are not that high from climate change perspective. Most of the people who have been suffering are poor. They don't have that kind of political strength which actually can reach to that level where people get resources from the government.
Here at Ground Zero, away from the blame game, affected communities say the cost of waiting is far too high.
Waterborne diseases continue to ravage women and children in flood-stricken villages. People are demanding urgent action to combat this crisis, calling it a litmus test for the government's commitment to the community.
Hera Mustafa, CNA, in Sujaval, Sindh Province.
And we will be bringing you more climate-related coverage from COP29 in Baku this week. You can keep with us here on CNA TV and also follow the latest on our website, cna.asia, and our mobile app, including this article on how wars are casting a shadow on the UN-led talks. Coming up on East Asia tonight, we'll tell you why consumers in China are slowing down on spending for the country's annual Singles' Day shopping festival. Singles' Day, or Double 11 in China, has become synonymous with the world's largest online shopping festival that's usually associated with frenetic fast deals. But to cope with a slowing economy, starting early and going slow seems to be the strategy this year. Well, CNA's Tan Yu-Guan with a report.
33-year-old Vicky Chen still remembers how tiring Singles' Day sales used to be, even for a mere shopper like herself.
最开始的时候，双11这个日子刚出来就只有1天，然后我们都记得就是掐着那个点，11月11号的0点，一定要在那个0点去买单。3-5年前的双11就逐渐的日子越来越长，然后到今年的双11，这时间已经很长了。
China's Singles' Day started out as a punt on the date 11th of November, with the 4 ones representing 4 singletons. But this year, Singles' Day promotion started out as early as 14th of October, a whole month before D-Day, and 10 days earlier than last year. This is in a bid to generate more sales, but it also alleviates the pressure of merchants to deliver everything at one go. And to drum up even more sales, Alibaba has brought the Singles' Day promotion to the US, where it ends on November 18, just 2 weeks before Thanksgiving, providing an enticing alternative to American consumers hankering to splurge during Black Friday sales, which takes place the Friday after Thanksgiving. However, the wider focus has diluted the excitement over Singles' Day itself in China.
双11感受上好像是平淡了一点，但平淡我会觉得是好事。我觉得大家一起掐着一个点去买，很多时候会产生一些为了凑单的一些过度消费，然后你买完了，收到东西了又要再退。
Refunds has been one of the pet peeves of merchants taking part in the world's largest online shopping sales event. The logistics of shipping the goods back cutting into already thin margins. To address that, Alibaba's platforms have launched 退货包, a service to help sellers cut the costs of returns. It also began to allow merchants to reject unreasonable refund requests.
This time, I think the major platforms, they're trying to be more friendly to the merchants, to avoid some manipulation of the policies by consumers.
This year, sellers also reported less pressure from Alibaba to cut prices. But on the flip side,
它的算法越来越复杂，然后它的折扣越来越少。就比如我的一个同事，他双11买了一个折叠椅，那个折叠椅只有50多块钱，但是要买300才可以减。
With discounts shrinking and the economy slowing, one key driving force for consumption this year appears to be coming from the government.
买了好多，就是小米的小家电啊什么的啊。
那你觉得促销活动划算吗？
怎么说呢？好像是国家补贴吧，小家电还是可以的。
In this Double 11 campaign, so if you buy some home appliance items, actually you can get some subsidies from the government. So trying, because it's always a typical way to boost consumptions.
The annual Singles' Day sales are being closely watched as a barometer for Chinese consumer sentiment. But since 2022, precise numbers were no longer available as retail giants Alibaba and JD.com stopped releasing Singles' Day sales figures. Tan Yu-Guan, CNA, Shanghai.
And that's all we've got for you in East Asia tonight. Don't forget your headlines anytime at cna.asia. And look us up on Facebook, YouTube, and on X. Thanks for watching.